And hello, good morning. And today I want to get into something that I believe is very interesting, and it's more of a speculation, and I also think it's a It's a I almost said prophecy, but I don't want to use that word. A prediction, and it's something that's very broad ranged, and it basically um, will lead into the idea of the megalomaniac. And this is somebody who identifies themselves as God. Now, this is something that is not new, obviously. I think that kings had this kind of a pathological condition, and especially, you learn about the divine right of kings. And there were a lot of European kings that would try to use some type of biblical genealogy to trace themselves back to important people in the Bible, and that would include Jesus, the lineage of Jesus. That goes back to David, and even further back to Adam and Eve. But uh, that could be for a another discussion, and it's hard to find that kind of literature. But needless to say, like there would be kings that would try to identify themselves with um, the lineage of Jesus, and that goes back to King David, and we'll just leave it at that. And so, like, they have this idea that they're special, and there's also examples where back then um, people would claim supernatural powers, and I think that a little further, down the road, like in Russia, um, there was an individual who relied on supernaturalism to mesmerize um, the rulers of Russia, and I'm referring to the Romanovs. And the person I'm actually talking about is one Rasputin. And so these are to me examples of the megalomaniac, where you somehow uh, believe in this about yourself, and what's funny is it works. I mean, the Romanovs family, before he was killed, before they killed him, and threw him in the river and all that, and it works. And the same with kings. People really want to be ruled, and they want to put their belief into something or onto somebody else. And oh, look at that potential scam. I've been getting these calls every day, and no, your government's not helping you about it. Okay, are you getting scam calls? And so uh, put something like that in your comments. But I don't want to get into that. So we're talking about how this is throughout the whole history of mankind, and I don't know how far back I can trace it, but like the Egyptian pharaohs were gods, and Roman Caesars, they were considered gods, and and all that. And then you have like Jesus. He was a man who assimilated the identity of a god. He was God. And I mean, this is the story. Like, you read your Bible, you go to church, and Jesus is Lord, and also the King of Kings. And so again, that's a really cool thing right there. You could actually see it all in one bundle. Is so you have Jesus, who is the Son of Man, but he's also the Son of God. And so you have men kings that have like a God complex, and you have like Jesus, who is supposed to be God. And then so what happens, the reason why this is important today is because we have like a megalomaniac in chief. We have a guy who thinks he's who okay, so here's the thing. Like, so um we we have a lot going on subconsciously, and so the stuff that's made visible, or substantially real or accessible via or via my speech, my writing, or just my expression. Sometimes that's just betrayed by body language, and just behaviorisms. And so that's why I say, don't look at what people say, look at what they do. And so with Trump, he's I used to call him like the bull in the china shop, but he's much worse than that. He's really like this giant, and he's kicking things over like he's Godzilla. And like this guy is like a fat ass reptile, who thinks he's God. And so this is a really good analogy for this megalomaniac type of individual. And he's an idiot king. He's a real like dullard. When you listen to him talk, this is gonna be the worst conversation. Imagine that you had to sit next to this guy on a flight to like, some remote, you know, destination that's going to take like 14 hours or whatever. You're just like, oh, man. And this guy, he's only talking about himself. And while you're sitting next to this guy, you're plugging your nose because something smells very rancid in the air. And we don't want to go to what exactly that might be. However, let's continue with this idea about the megalomaniac. So, and this is very important because, so like, what goes on in your mind, there's a lot of stuff going in your mind subconsciously. So, and also there's this idea that all your decisions that you make have already been made for you before you even like begin to act them out. And so I really think that subconsciously this guy thinks that he is uh, like the savior of something. And he even though he might not be a practicing Christian, he probably believes that something supernatural has made him what he is, the president and all that. And he's interacting with Israel, and there's a problem there. I mean, like the Israel state, which is interesting because I just saw how these Hasidic Jews are being harassed by the Israeli police, and it's because I'm telling you, these Orthodox religious Jews, a lot of them are against what's going on in Gaza. And so the Israeli police are like, I saw one Hasidic Jew wrestled to the ground by the Israeli cops. And so the state of Israel, it's like, so what's happening is they're using the ignorant American Christians who believe in a type of God complex of Israel. Like there's a God complex there, and the dispensational Americans believe that they are special when they interact with this to bring on the second coming of Christ. And so to do that, you need like an Armageddon. And so the wars have to, take place to usher in the end of the world, so that you can be with the creator of the world to create a new world, and say bye bye to this world. So really, that's why I don't think Christians really care about the earth. They don't care about the ecology of the world. And what they do instead is they kind of treat the world like a giant baseball game. Like, and so you hit the ball, and then like, so you have to go around the diamond, and then you get home, you're safe. And so now that you're safe, you're done with the ecology of the world, and you're living in this fantasy that you're going to be in the heavens, harpazoed with God, grabbing you up, and you're one of the you're so special. That's a type of God complex that you have, because if you say God's made in your image, you see. So this whole thing about the God complex is something that you could really unpack. And there's got to be people who are like doctors of theology or psychology or anthropology and history, and they're writing about this. And I got to find some of those books. This is just me off the cuff, I've read some stuff. And, I know a little bit about it, and so I think it's something to do with the fact that we have a meta consciousness. We're aware of who we are, and so we have this myopic sense of reality because we can only use our words, our language to determine what's out there. And then so that's what gives us power over or dominion over our environment. And it's so amazing because like first we're in this natural world, but then as we developed our alphabet, lingo and our ability to articulate and name things, it's like we put the spell on that. But like to make this more short, it's like we're able to measure and quantify. And so what we wound up doing is changing the natural world according to our will and made it the milieu, our man-made environment. So now you look around me, you look around you outside, 80% of it's all like man-made stuff. The one thing that's not is the sky, and stuff like that. And I say we'll be tied the person that's in 100% man-made environment where it's all man-made. Now, if you have a chihuahua gnawing at your pant leg, guess what? You made that. We made that. That ain't natural, man. Your chihuahuas aren't natural, man. I'm sorry. I don't know. Is there any wild chihuahuas that you can find? If you look at the wild chicken, it's different than domesticated chicken. You look at wild bananas, they're not the Cavendish, yellow Cavendish bananas. They're different. So we have this propensity to do this. And then we have like all these gods, and then like people identify themselves as gods. So it's literal, but it's also subliminal. And that's why I want to get into this. So we're stuck with this. And I think that's why there are components to challenge this. There are characteristics of humanity that challenge this. And a lot of that might be found in, the East. Like historically speaking, the idea about identifying and like, killing the ego and all that. Like you have your Zen meditation and all this and all that. And like, they believe that like the Hindus believe that this is Maya, this is illusion. So you can't get, attached to any of this. And people want to get into like spirituality or whatever. And you have like the Charlie Kirks of the world, and you have like the Ben Shapiro's of the world. You even have like Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, and all that effing cabinet. And they all like push the Bible. It's all about the Bible. And it's like, well, I always wanted to say like, maybe I could believe in some kind of a supreme God or supreme being, but I want to free it from the monopoly of the Bible, And the reason why I bring up the Bible is because Trump, there's like pictures of, remember that photograph, the picture of him, photograph of him holding the Bible upside down. He was like, trying to, and you ask him like, what's your favorite book in the Bible? It's like, well, they're all good. I like them all. I can't specify which one because I don't know exactly the rest of it, but it's like, what about like love your enemy? It's better to give than receive. Whatever. It's like, uh, you know, it's like I'm just like, so what I'm saying is these people use God for their own subconscious megalomaniac tendencies. And that's what I really think. I think Christians, American Christians specifically, are the most narcissistic people ever. And like you look at Trump, that's a perfect example of narcissism. And the fact that the Christians follow that. And I know this for a fact because I was, supping with them at one time, fellowshipping with them at one time. And that's why I got out of Christianity as the way they practice it, and I got into politics. All right. And that's what all this is. So I want to kind of unpack this. But before I do this is going to be another long one. I'm going to focus on Elon Musk again, for the immediate thing, but then I'm going to pan out and look at like how this type of mentality will evolve like it starts out with technology versus legalities that are put in place by public servants, and how they they can somehow, take over. I mean, you have like these geeky engineers that understand science and technology, and they are smart. Like, I don't think Elon Musk could get behind get inside a CPU and fix it. So no, he cannot fix a computer. Yeah, he cannot. He can't get in there and, I can fix this, take it apart and fix it. All right. He's not tech savvy like that, but he is above average intelligence, and so he's able to figure out how to manipulate the man-made world that really depends on technology and the internet. And he was able to get PayPal off the ground and do all this and all that. He's a good businessman. He must be considered a brilliant businessman because he's a trillionaire. Because that's what it is. He is a businessman, and he's pushing the god of this world, which is money, right? That's what all this is. But it wouldn't be backed by, you can't, like he has the access to technology and the power that you get from technology, And so I'm going to get into this and how that sort of like can bankrupt just like a bunch of law books and a bunch of, you know, dedications to, like, say, our forefathers, and like blah blah blah, the Constitution, blah blah blah, and say, oh, that's just paperwork. We've got the gunpowder. We have the modern day guns. We have the technology, in other words, that makes the guns. You see what I'm getting at? Controlling the internet, the roads, social media, and then your brain with, Neuralink. I want to get into all of that, but so the thing is, before I do, I want to say about our human nature. Like, remember your children. If you have kids, remember when you were a kid, and like, I think there's like a genuine, unique spark there, and I think that's who you really are. It also includes people who are cruel, and yeah, ultimately, I think it's all learned. So I don't want to. I'm not going to go into anything. It's beyond, or that sort of like contradicts, psychology or whatever, as the specialists know it. But I would submit that we still don't know a lot about what really makes us tick. I've said in the past, like, we're animals, and I agree with all the biological explanations to what we are. But I think there's more to that. But I don't want to get into like anything supernatural or anything right now. I'm just saying that when you look at kids, there's something there, and they're not all the same, right? But there's like this innocence there that, I guess, from innocence to experience. I mean, you have innocence there, and that's kind of like, but then that's completely piled. You pile all sorts of stuff that the society throws on the child, starting with the family unit, and then like the school, and then the immediate environment, and then the world at large. And with social media, it complicates things. And you have kids that are like, I see videos of kids destroying their kitchen because their mom took their phone away, and it's like, that's learned. That stuff's learned. But like, even before that, like, there's like the curiosity you have of nature, and she loves kittens, she really loves little bunnies and cats and birds. But when she's older, she's like this lawyer. She doesn't like any of that stuff anymore, And so these things kind of change you. But I think that, like, so there's two times when I think your true nature is more evident or apparent. It's when you're a little one, but also when you get older. And I want to talk about that. So when you get older, your defenses are down like they were when you were little. And so something exudes from your center who you really are. And these are the people who all voted for Trump. It turns out that they were stink bombs from the beginning. And I know for a fact that some of the guys that used to bully me when I was a kid, when I was really young, I was out chasing butterflies and I was trying to draw them. That's the kind of person I was, and I was like a loner, and I was always drawing, and I was fascinated by the outdoors, like nature and all that. I never lived outdoors, like camping and all that. I did a little bit of that in Michigan, more in Michigan, but like in Michigan, people camping and all that, and you're a teenager. Did all that, and coming to Arizona, it's kind of hard to do that because it's so freaking hot, and I miss being out in nature, but I try to walk around a lot. And and I've already mentioned how the most important thing we have is looking up outside and you can still see the sky above us. That's the best thing we've got. And I think that's connected to what I'm going to get into. So that's what I was like when I was younger. And I was into bird watching when my friends were like smoking cigarettes and all that, and you know, some of them getting into fights, some of them smoking pot. I was I mean, I got this book on the North American birds. They got binoculars, and we used to have more woodland areas in our neighborhood in Warren. I used to go out there and try to identify them and draw them. And like my friend Jerry Kentowski was like, "Oh my God, you're bird watching!" Oh my! He put his hand on his face, like, "Oh my!" I'd make him laugh. He was like, but he was my best friend one time. And now he's a Trump supporter, and like this is the hypocrisy of these people. So like he says Joe Biden was making the Democrats are weak, and he like totally lambasts Joe Biden. Then Trump becomes president, again, and then there's like activity, social media activity on Facebook, and he's like saying, "Well, you shouldn't say that because he's the president." And so it's like I can't even get into a conversation with him or these people with that kind of mentality. It's like I give up. I can't. So instead, I'd rather just make these videos and say, "Look, I did my part to shed some light on the matter, and it's the best I can do," and move on. I got to get oil for my pringles. I got to work on. I'm working on a painting right now. I got to get to it. So, but anyway, so that's when you're young. When you're living you're building your own little castle, your own little world. You get married, you have kids, and all that, and you have a job. That's like the most basic or stereotypical scenario, and there's nothing wrong with those things, right? And you know, hey, let's do like what the animals do on the, you know, what's that song? You do what the animals do on the. Yeah, it's like let's do what they do on the Discovery Channel, that kind of a thing. And it's strictly, perfectly, 100% natural, And yeah, you should get married and have kids. I mean, I don't know. How could you be against that? Technically, it didn't work out for me, but I stood up at people's weddings, and yeah, man, more power to you. I'm a romantic at heart, but I'm more like the romantic of the philosophical, artistic nature. Like, so I kind of like ultimately, if somebody was like, dude, you don't believe in any kind of thing, like God or anything, I'd say, well, how about this? Just for now, because we're in an elevator, and your floor is almost coming, up in that. I believe that somehow God and nature are the same thing in some weird way. It's kind of hard to explain, just for now. But I think it's more complicated than that. One day I want to get into what's really trying to, make itself evident in my mind about the world. How, and it has to be always has to wind up being what I believe, because what I know will obviously construct what I believe. And so what I believe, if it contradicts what I obviously know to be true, I'm not going to say that I believe that the when you release a ball, it's going to go up. I'm going to believe that it's going to go down because of the pull of gravity, blah 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 blah. So it's like, imagine that for everything about my knowledge, and so that has to somehow, help support the edifice of my faith or my belief. But it's not. I'm a really complicated, animal. So I'm complicated. So I used to think I was atheist when I jumped out of Christianity. Now I don't think I'm an atheist, but I'm definitely not for any kind of monotheistic God. I just because look what's happening because of it. You have one monotheism fighting another monotheism. The Islamic one fighting the Christian one. Just like the Christian Crusade times. It's almost like we haven't gotten out of that yet. And then you have Putin. He's Eastern Orthodox, you know, and like they're outlawing the pentagram like magic or whatever, like they call it. It's all satanic, Satanism, and so you get 7 years in prison. Probably, what's really weird is it'd be interesting to do an experiment. You take a metaphysical bookstore like the one you have like in Phoenix, Arizona, and you drop that in Moscow, and it's the same books, like maybe all in Russian and all that, and then somehow Putin knows about it. What would happen to that bookstore? I don't know. Google, are there metaphysical bookstores in Russia? I don't know. I'm not attacking Russia. That's not what this is about. So I'm not going to go there. So I kind of almost forgot, but I didn't, what I was really going to talk about before I get into this discussion. It's already like 26 minutes into this, so sorry. I think your true nature of a spark of what you really are genuinely is more visible when you're really young. And then when it becomes like when you get really old. And unfortunately, for some people, you actually see the kind of person they really are. And it's not always pretty. And Joseph Campbell says something, as you get older, you become more mass and energy. And that's like, that kind of defends my belief that you lose your ability to defend, and fend off, and you're, the bombardment of reality, the slings and arrows of life, and so you just don't care anymore. It's like I don't like I never liked him because Elton John, yeah, because he was gay. Somebody's like 60 saying that, but he wouldn't have said that when he was 40. But he was already inside of him. So his truth is coming out, so that your truth will come out when you're an older man or woman, just like it came out when you're a little wee mite. That's what I'm trying to say. And I don't see, okay, like, I don't know. No, I'm not going to look this up, but I'm going to assume that a lot of Gen Z people are probably not so geared for fighting for Israel, and not so geared up on, like, all the Pete Hegseth, mentality of the um you know of what he's done to our military, the Department of War, and they're not really into Trump. And I already know, like, I've been watching, like, Adam Mockler and Dean Withers, and they're obviously not into, 47, and they are Gen Z. And so I'm just going to put that out there. So, and that's an example where these two people, they somehow were able to retain something of their innocence when they were, like, much younger. And so it'd be interesting to see what happens when they become 30, 40. Because what happens is when you reach your 40th year, you've already compromised. You've compromised a lot of your original intentions that were still trying to be made known to you when you were a kid. Like, my original intention was, when I was a kid, is I wanted to draw. I wanted to make drawings and paint. And I stuck to that through my whole life. And the thing is, that's not a way to become rich, materially. You might become homeless sticking to your true nature. But you got to think about that, for instance. For example, what's homeless? We are from the same planet that every animal is. Are there any homeless birds, wild birds? Are there any wild homeless birds or wild homeless javelinas or, guinea fowl or whatever? Homeless guinea fowl around here, ma. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? We're the only ones who create this idea of homelessness. Sure, chimpanzees have territorial kind of wars and all that. And what's interesting about chimpanzees and people are they're our closest non-human ancestors, or closest non-human relatives. and watch the Chimp Empire. I think it's called Chimp Empire, Empire of the Chimp. It's blow your mind. Like there's like mafia type shit going on with these chimps, man. They're like this to their enemies, and they go at it. Like it's really weird. It's really weird how, man. I don't even think lions do that, and they're lions king of the jungle, and these chimps are like something sinister about them, man. So yeah, and they're our closest non-human relative, and so we're great apes. I already got into that. Okay, so basically, at least biologically, so basically, when you're older, so when you're in the middle, so you have like when you're really young, when you're really old, in the middle, you have this weight put on you, like Project Nietzsche said, put a weight on me, and so that weight is on your shoulders, and you're willingly doing it. You want to get into that law firm, you want to get that promotion, and you want to get the right, partner, and you want to get into the right, the better part of the neighborhood, and you want to get the better deal, and you just want to have the better life, all that America can offer you, and you really like are putting a lot of what you really are, you know, to rest because you got to make ends meet, and so you create these narratives that justify your actions, and it's a lot of it's subconscious, is what I'm saying, and so like it, you know, I'm not saying it's all bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, and like a lot of there are people who a lot of people stick to it seems like, yeah, it seems like little Johnny who should be a politician because he's always talking about this crap, uh, um, like a king comes to New York, like Charlie Chaplin's talking to that little kid. The little kid's reading Karl Marx. The little kid like blows Charlie Chaplin away. Only with a passport. Only with a passport. You cannot travel only with a passport. And it's like, yeah, that kid's gonna wind up becoming a politician or something, unless he's gonna blow his brains out. And I think that kid was a son. You know, so I mean, you have like you have things like that. Like when I was a kid, my teachers were telling my parents, yeah, he's really clever. He draws these little things, and he's telling stories. He likes to draw a lot. And yeah, and so I'm one of the people that kind of stuck to it. Whether it brings me a lot of monetary satisfaction or not is beside the point. It's just what happened to me, and I kind of like fought it out. And I'm proud to say that, But that's, I don't want to talk about me though. It's more like about us, what's happening. And so, but there's a lot of people who forgot who they really are, and like they wind up lawyers, and they wind up, in high positions of power. And I think there's something that like festers, but they sort of keep it hidden. But then when you get older, you kind of let it all hang out. And by that time, you're voting for Trump. You're voting for Trump. Yeah, I think Elton John was gay. Didn't care for him much. I'm going to vote for Trump. Yeah, Kid Rock, he's an American. I'm going to vote for Trump. Trump. Don't make fun of him. He's our president. You should respect the president. Joe Biden's a piece of crap. Obama's not my president. Oh, Donald Trump's the president. You should respect the president. I mean, are you really aware of what you're doing, your actions, and how you have metastasized into this clump or lump of flesh? And there's no defense for, any claim of humanity left at this point. And you look at the people in the Epstein files, and you look, including Trump, and like Ghislaine Maxwell and all that. Like, I'd like to punch her, man. It's like, who are these ugly, like, goblin type creatures, And these are the people that rule over us. Isn't this like sickening, And so anyways, so that's, I want to get into that. But so like what I'm going to do is, take us through a journey where I use ChatGPT, and we're going to talk about uh, some things regarding Elon Musk and the technology thereof and stuff. See where it can go. First, I went in with the question: do the companies that Elon Musk run have military potential? Asking this, knowing the answer, which to me is 100% yes. And so, without reading every single syllable, I'm going to try to push through this. So, like it says, yes, several Elon Musk's companies have significant military potential, and in some cases, they are already directly involved in military or national security work. So it goes on to list them. You have like SpaceX, and the potential is extremely high. And because of rockets, military satellites, launch infrastructure. SpaceX, so Starlink, Starshield, extremely high battlefield communications, satellite networking, and surveillance data. XAI, high AI for intelligence analysis, military decision support. Tesla, high autonomous vehicles. That's all we have to know about that. Neuralink, brain computer interfaces. Brain computer interfaces. Rehabilitation, human machine control. Oh man, I wanna go after that. So what that means is your brain controls the machine. But I want to bring up Spider-Man and Doc Ock. Doc Ock. Listen to me now. Peter Parker's right. Listen to me now. Go back and watch that tonight. Okay, the Boeing company, moderate. That's like underground infrastructure, blah blah blah, logistics, and X, moderately high, information operations, communications, massive information network, blah blah blah. So, and then it gets into more detail. Like SpaceX is already a major military contractor. They have pictures and all that. So I don't know if I want to like. So let me zip through this to get further along here. I mean, some of it is really important. Like with so I already jumped down to three. So it's like XAI, military AI. So like this is beyond speculation. This is like Musk's XAI reached an agreement with the Pentagon allowing its Grok AI model to be used in classified military systems. Tesla is really huge, high military potential because of the automated vehicles. And then also, we get into Neuralink, and there's you have Optimus also, mention an army of robots. Um, I mean, you got like general purpose humanoid robot. And so they can carry supplies, move ammunition, perform dangerous maintenance, enter contaminated environments. I mean, this is like, are you getting a Woody with Bill Hicks about the weapons, and how, America is about guns, getting stiffy? Well, man, these people are getting like, their whole body is like this. They're all stiff, like rigor mortis, their dick is not the only thing rigor mortis here. And it's like, oh yeah, I can't help. Oh, I'm getting such a stiffy. Like Elon Musk. You see how it all comes together here? This is what I got to deal with. This is the kind of stuff that goes on in my head. Welcome to my world. So people are really getting a hard on for this shit. These robots can operate vehicles. They can assist wounded personnel. Oh well, it's for the children, the wounded children out there, the wounded soldiers, our personnel. Oh, all the innocents. We're gonna have these robots save them. Save us, robot. I love you because no one else loved me. I'm going to make my own little Frankenstein monster, and it's gonna love me because no one loved me. I'm gonna make Facebook from Face Mash because I couldn't get any tail and the girls made fun of me. So I want to make Face Mash and pit them up against each other for us to judge and see which one's a dog and which one's not. It's like, oh, okay, I'm getting really off on a tangent. Tesla's stated objective for Optimus is a general purpose, an autonomous humanoid capable of performing unsafe, repetitive, and boring tasks. Oh, so it's like Well, you got to remember the whole thing about general AI is a lot more dangerous than like specified AI. So specified AI can just do one regimented task, one thing. General is where it can self-learn to a certain extent and adapt to its environment that you throw at it. That's general AI. I think that the success will be like so with Elon Musk. He really is an interesting. Like know your enemy. It's really interesting. Like I think it's good to study people like Elon Musk because you see what's going on. Like so, you have Neuralink, which is the component in the brain, and then you also have the other thing like with like automated cars and general AI robots. I think that um, again, I'm going to draw upon artists and creators to to help with this. So I'm gonna draw upon Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, and then I'll draw upon a little bit of Phil K. Dick, your androids dream of electric sheep, and oh, there was a third one, but I can't remember it. But I also remember RoboCop. And so, oh yeah, the other one was H.R. Giger. I mentioned him before, the biomechanoid artist of the '70s. His stuff is like totally the bomb. And that's what he used to say. Like my older brother used to say, "Oh, that's the bomb." That we said in the '70s. Oh, that's the bomb. You know, uh, my age is showing. I come with a little bit of history. You know, and so and I think that's what's going to happen, people. Mark my word. You're gonna to make a better kind of like mechanism that's like a person, a android or a replicant or whatever. I think you're gonna have to somehow infuse in it human biological matter and like human brain cells. Somehow you have to have like brain cells working in tandem with the most advanced form of computer tech. And it's liquid and it's all wet and slimy and stuff, but it's half of it's synthetic and the other half is biological. And like there's gonna be like this merger of the two where it's like you don't know where one stops, the other one starts. I think that's where it's headed. Anyway, so and then check this out. Like so in brain computer interface technology, okay, so they're talking about because I'm kind of jumping through here. But like with Neuralink, its brain computer interface technology could eventually allow humans to control computers or machines through neural channels. So it's like human brain, neural interface, computer and machine. So there's that. That's an odd. I'm getting even further. I'm getting. You saw where I was. That's fact. Where I'm creating fiction, but I think that fact and fiction are the line between the two is blurry. Is blurred. In the distant future, that could potentially mean controlling robotic systems, prosthetics, vehicles, or other machines through neural interfaces. Okay, so we have that. So the boring, I don't know, I think I said Boeing before. It's Boring Company. The Boring Company, its military organizations have historically valued underground facilities for command centers, protected infrastructure, transportation, storage, and hardened facilities. Okay, blah blah blah. Okay, X. It says X is probably the least obvious one. It might be interesting to look at this. Okay, enormous amounts of real-time information, global communications, information dissemination, geolocation-related information, public sentiment information, open source intelligence, potential influence over information flows, and stuff like that. Is it just something to do with like Ukraine and um, the internet, like his, you know, Starlink. So I zipped through here a little bit, and this is what's interesting. It says, so this is what's cool. It says, and here where it gets really interesting. If you put the technology together rather than looking at the companies individually, you can see the potential architecture. SpaceX launches satellites. Starlink Starshield creates global communications and space-based infrastructure. Tesla provides batteries, autonomous systems, AI hardware, and robots. Optimus provides potentially autonomous physical machines. That's the humanoid type things. XAI provides AI capable of processing enormous amounts of information. Neuralink potentially provides human-machine interfaces. X provides a gigantic information and communications platform. That is an unusually broad technological profile for one individual control. And that's why I was thinking about this. This guy's a freaking octopus. And so could these technologies be militarized? Absolutely. And that's what my whole impetus for this video was, being guided by or inspired by. So it actually, are some already militarized? Yes, especially SpaceX, Starlink, Starshield, and increasingly XAI. So that's worth mentioning. This is actually happening right now in real time. And then it goes, yeah, but it doesn't mean that Musk personally controls the U.S. military. Of course not. But I want to get into my scenario that I'm cooking up a little bit later on in this video. So no, Elon Musk doesn't control the military; the government does. But the fact that a private businessman can own companies supplying critical pieces of military infrastructure is a generally important issue of power, and that's actually the more interesting question. What happens when one private individual controls satellites, launch vehicles, AI, robotics, autonomous vehicles, communications, and a major social media platform simultaneously? Question. And that's what it asks. And so I'm like, but doesn't this give him like ultimate like potential power? Like so, and this is important because right now he's like a battery of energy, but that's blocked off from like say the legalities of what's considered power. That power is still the government's and people who are elected in office and people who are supposed to represent us. That's what a republic is, right? Another reason why I got into this is like, yeah, well, how? Because I want to show how these two things kind of exchange and how one could potentially overcome the other. How would that happen? Well, it's when the private sector winds up in the public servant sector, and it's already happened with DOGE. You think that's gonna be the last time you're gonna have like some, rich ass person like Elon Musk that's really, up in your face in terms of relevance in this material world that we have in this first world country and abroad? He's very relevant, and his tech is very relevant, and so that's why he winds up over there. He crosses the bridge from public to private or what have you, like the private sector versus the public. And like public servant, I don't know. Okay, anyway. So like and so he goes in there and he does his thing and then he leaves his legacy or mark, and that changes things for these tech lords. And I already got into that. And I got into how that made him a trillionaire. And so in here it's like somehow the chat GPT was kind of reneging on originally what it said in a previous video. And I checked it on it, and anyways, now I'm digressing. I'm chasing two rabbit trails when I should be going down into one, and then it'll take us to the other, So, but doesn't this mean that it gives Elon Musk people like him a lot of power? Yes, that is the deeper issue. The concern isn't simply that Musk's companies can make military equipment; it's that controlling so many strategically important technologies can give a private individual more leverage over governments, militaries, markets, and information systems. I think that's where his genius lies. Like, so Elon Musk wouldn't be able to like do what Nikola Tesla was able to do. Like that guy was hands-on making the machines that visualized or materialize his particular idea of, you know, his vision. Like he gave us the alternating current generator. That guy did. He didn't come up with the idea and just have other people do it. Like, yeah, I have this idea. It's better than what Edison has with direct current thing. I got something else. I don't know how to make the engineer's black box. You have to come up with that shit to make it work. But that's what I want. That's kind of like what this guy is doing. But Tesla, he created the stuff, and it's ironic that his cars are named after this brilliant, you know, uh, guy. So, and so I think that's where his genius lies. Just it's strategic and simultaneously able to run these companies and how they're strategically positioned in terms of what their capacities are. And it says right here, he has leverage over, these things. Musk's potential power. Musk's potential power comes from stacking different kinds of leverage. And Trump kind of did a similar thing in his own little way. And I think that's how these people really gain something over the rest of us. Anyways, and so like you have infrastructure power. SpaceX, Starlink can provide infrastructure for governments and militaries need. And if a private company controls an important communications network, that creates leverage, even if the government ultimately has contractual and regulatory authority. The technological power. Tesla brings batteries, autonomous systems, AI, manufacturing, and robots. SpaceX brings rockets and satellites. XAI brings AI. Neuralink brings brain-computer interfaces. Each technology by itself is powerful. Together, they create much broader technological portfolio. Information power. X gives Musk control over a huge communications platform that can influence what information spreads. The content. It influences the content of the information. What receives attention and how political narratives develop. That's why I have to read some of this fine print, Political leverage. A billionaire who can provide technologies that governments consider strategically important and potentially gain access and influence that ordinary citizens simply cannot. Yeah, he was the chair of DOGE, for one. Military leverage. This is particularly significant because some of Musk's technology is already integrated into national security activities. That means his companies aren't merely capable of supplying, they can become part of the infrastructure. Okay. So and then ChatGPT is like trying to check me. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't mean that he controls the military. Of course not. Yet. And that's okay. I don't want to, let the cat out of the bag just yet. Right now, the U.S. government can regulate companies and stuff like that. And that's the whole thing. The word regulate comes in. That was a clue for me, like there was a group of people always saying deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. And they usually were wearing the red hats. Like they're usually like the Republicans, Usually, not always, but like usually that's what you have. I think it's bipartisan things where they're both like Clinton's and Bush Jr. They were kind of in agreement with deregulating certain things. And I totally get that. But the majority is like it's deregulating. Like Reagan, the government is the problem, not the solution to the problem. The government is the problem. But he's just saying deregulate. Ultimately, some of these people want to privatize everything. And that's what I'm saying. Well, you're going to get that, but not the way you intended. They're going to take over. You're going to have a privatized military, privatize this, run by the Terrell Corporation. That's what I think. That's where I'm going with all this. But just to say that, and then I end of the video. But I have to do the busy work and go through and interact with the internet because the internet gives me all sorts of sources. One of these days I should quote the sources that I'm getting from here. But they're like Forbes, there's AP, you know, Associated Press, and a bunch of CNN, sometimes even Fox pops up, all these and that's the thing. It's a total like pastiche of different sources, and that's why I like doing this. It's not just one source that I'm getting all this, and that's why I'm like, wow, it's kind of like the fox in the hen house, but he's kind of sleeping, and I get to get him to share his little secrets in his sleep. That's what I like to you know um So a society can become increasingly dependent on privately controlled technological infrastructure, giving the owners of that infrastructure usual political and strategic leverage. And this isn't a Musk problem. It applies to Amazon. Yeah, of course, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Palantir, SpaceX, major defense contractors, financial institutions, pharmaceutical companies, energy companies, and other corporations whose capabilities have become intertwined with government functions. And that's because money, they drop money into these people, in their portfolios, you know, and they become, that's how come politicians become millionaires slash billionaires, you know. Um, the really unusual thing, because this is why I'm focusing on Musk, is the breadth. One person has interests spanning space, satellites, telecommunication, AI, robotics, automobiles, energy, social media, and brain-computer interfaces. I don't think I would have come this close to what I'm concluding if it wasn't for Elon Musk. Because you have like Amazon, you have like Facebook or Meta, and so on and so on. It's kind of like it's all like spaced out, like this person, this person. But with Elon Musk, it's within one entity, and I'm like, okay, there's something going on here, and that's why I'm kind of fortunate for being able to put this together. Um, so um, so it goes. So your underlying point is reasonable. Concentrating many strategically important technologies in the hands of a small number of extremely wealthy individuals can create a concentration of power that goes beyond that financial wealth. So this is, I didn't plan to say this now, but I will. So you could have like these different companies, corporations, sort of like they kind of like, hey, I want to have a piece of this pie too. So they all become our new politicians. They become the ones who make the laws, and they're the ones that can determine who's going to be in the Supreme. So I think that's, you're going to have like the three branches of government, and then these big corporations they're moving in, and then it's like, well, no, we are going to decide who's going to be the Supreme Court, and that democracy's gone by then, of course, because you're not, and that's the thing. That's why I was traditionally saying, no, you want to have some kind of a government, and they're supposed to oversee things in a society, and so it prevents this kind of stuff from happening. So, but when these tech overlords come in, it's not going to be like, so like you have Citizens United, which is something to look into, and that's like the shoe, in, or the nose of the camel in the tent kind of a thing. I think it's all connected. So it's like with that, you could use money to buy votes, and that's what that connects to, and so it's the First Amendment right for a corporation to be able to you know toss in all sorts of money into the coffers of some elected official. It's just but that's just that was then. Now it's even more prevalent with how DOGE formed and all that, and how like, so this scenario that I'm already letting out is like, so you could have like these different tech companies and other big corporations have a stronger gridlock or influence on the government and the decision makings of the government, to where some, like, you wake up one day and it's like, yeah, the Supreme Court is now privately owned. They're still part of the United States government. They're still part of the government, but you know, And like, what if you can have like stock shareholders? Like, you can have like people investing. And so we're gonna have a thing now where you can invest in the government, and like you invest in a company. I mean, I know you can buy stocks and bonds, and that's an example of that, right? I mean, this is off the cuff. This part of it, I don't have this loaded up in the chambers here, but like, so I mean, think about this. If you treat like the Supreme Court as a business entity, and then people could invest in it, you hate the legislative branch. So what are the three branches of government? You have the executive, legislative, and the judiciary, right? So what if one of the three are like privatized? And like, well, with the other two are, they're public. And then, well, no, the half of this is, and half of this, you could. That's how this could kind of unfold. The idea is to make it look like it's the same. And so an example is like you have healthcare, and so like I had Cigna, and then it became Evernorth. It's the people are still there, but they changed the name. Well, they're gonna do that with Social Security, and why not do that with the government? They're gonna change things, but it's the same. And that's kind of think. How about you need a transference of power, because you get like these politicians, and like you get Mitch McConnell, a turtlehead. I mean, is he dead or is he not? We don't know. He's a living dead. And this guy can't do anything. It's all like legality. It's all paperwork. They don't know anything about engineering. They don't know anything about ecology or science. You know what I'm saying? And so it makes sense that smarter people have to run the country, run the world. you know, and it's not going to be like these talking heads anymore. And that's why when you look at a lot of science fiction scenarios, the leaders are sort of like behind the corporate entities. And unless you just have like some guy on a hill and he's like, sitting there with his dog, and the leader blesses you and wishes you a good night. I think there was like something in Sleeper, and so like, but really that's being run by the brains, the people that really are brains. They understand how the physical world works, because politicians don't know how the physical world works. They only know paper work. Like there's that movie, TV series called The Paper Chase. It's about people going to law school to become lawyers. That's all they know is the paper chase. They chase the paper. And it's funny because isn't money paper? So it's like and then you have these other people, these businessmen. Well, I make a lot of money like Trump. Yeah, but you don't know anything about the freaking natural world, let alone about the Bible. You don't know anything about anything. You just know how to make the art of the deal to stash money for yourself and your family. It's all nepotism going on right now. And so it kind of like people before, yeah, we'll be for this. We're for like intelligent engineers and scientists and that running the country. We're for that because we're tired of the government. The government's so stupid. It's full of crooked, corrupt politicians. We don't want any more politicians. We want scientists to rule us. And so that's an example of why that could happen, right there, because people will vote for it. So what if you vote for these things become privatized? Well, you voted for us to take over. Now you don't want it anymore? Well, not now, I got this thing in my head, like, it's buzzing in the back of my head. I didn't expect that. I don't want, get this out of here. I don't want this. So anyways, so it says that this guy has this concentration of power that goes beyond financial wealth. And that's a much more interesting question than simply asking whether Musk's companies could build weapons. How much political power should a private individual be able to acquire simply by owning infrastructure that a modern state increasingly needs? So, like, I'm going to read how I asked it. What if the government was shut down for an extended period of time to the point where it starts to basically fall apart? And how would I'm actually I'm mocking my own question. I'm like, parodying my own self. What if the government was shut down for an extended period of time to the point where it starts to basically fall apart? And how would that affect powerful people like Elon Musk? What if he had to come in and start taking over? He would already have his own army and all that, or he could start making his own army. And so how far are we from something like that happening, considering a lot of governmental crises type scenarios that we're already seeing? And are we seeing a lot of problems with our government? Literally, with Trump and this whole Iran war, he's pretty much we ran out of our arsenal over there. Like, we don't have any more weapons left. We're running out of these particular like weapons, like these missiles and stuff like that. It's like a horrible mishandling scenario. Like, the government is ridiculous, and then there are times when the government shuts down. Oh well, we're not shut down. Amazon's not shut down, and Tesla are, we'll come in and save the day. If that was shut down for 3 years, imagine the government was shut down for 3 fucking years. You know, it could happen. I mean, I'm sorry. Look at these people who are in the White House. Look at them. They're fucking goons. And like RFK Jr., once in a while he'll say something truthful, like, you lied about the COVID thing, and Anthony Fauci's a liar. Well, I'm not. I would never hit him there. You know. And so there are things there are and that's why it's like a wash. People defend that. It's like, well, I can't. You know, he's wrote a few books. And it's like, how this guy, and he's a Kennedy, and it's like, wow. But first he's lambasting the president. You know, and then he becomes the president's like little sheepdog, and so that's why I just can't stand the guy. I can't stand. And Eddie Vance, I'll never be a Trump guy, and now he's his vice president. And so every time he defends Trump, how could you? You said that you were never going to be a Trump guy. I can't. I forget that, man. That alone should be like a red flag for any red hat wearer. Okay, so I'm asking this question, and so how far uh, are we from something like that happening, considering a lot of government? Okay, already. Okay. It goes, yes, but I would put it in a very. I would put it. Yes, I would put a very important qualification on the scenario you're describing. This is me and ChatGPT having a conversation here. A prolonged government crisis could increase the relative power of people like Musk without getting anywhere near the point where Musk could simply become the ruler of the United States. That's where I am going. I have to admit, the more realistic danger is something subtle. Government becomes weaker while private infrastructure becomes more important, allowing extremely wealthy individuals and corporations to acquire extraordinary leverage over what remains of the state. And that's what it is. And given what is happening now, that is worth thinking about seriously rather than dismissing it as science fiction. First, a shutdown isn't the same thing as a government collapse. And I don't want to read about that. There's a paragraph, and let's just leave it at that. But your hypothetical gets interesting if we push it much further. Imagine a cascading crisis. Okay, this I want to go over. Congress becomes unable to fund the government. Federal agencies progressively lose personnel. I do that. Federal agencies progressively lose personnel and operational capacity. Now, does that not ring a bell? Reagan, he wants a downsized government. Republicans want a downsized government. DOGE comes and does just that. Financial agencies progressively lose personnel and operational capacity. This is off the cuff of my memory. Didn't Obama have like a whole immunology team, of experts that can block, pandemics and stuff, like the bird flu or SARS or whatever, and then like Trump becomes president, and then he fires all those people because, from I understand what he said. Well, they're sitting around collecting a paycheck, but they're not doing anything. Has RFK Jr. ever mentioned that? Apart from attacking Anthony Fauci, which I know that there's a lot of problems with that guy. There's a lot of problems. If you look up COVID being a lab leak, the FBI and CIA think that it is, and there's a third agency. And you can say, yeah, but Trump controls all that. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why I kind of keep away from that whole controversy, and I like to look at other things that are, very, very problematic, like the war in Iran, and attacking Venezuela, and how Trump wants to take over Cuba, or like Mexico and Canada and Greenland, and that ties in with this whole megalomania type, um, complex, God type complex or whatever. So like, and that's him, and now we're looking at, what's his name, Elon Musk. So like, one, you have like Congress becomes unable to fund government, federal agencies progressively lose personnel and operational capacity, political legitimacy deteriorates, state begins acting increasingly independently. Oh, there you go. That's another one. As the government is collapsing, like, states will secede. Oh yeah, we're you might see that if you're 20 years old, you're gonna see that in your lifetime, kiddo. You're gonna see the United States seceding parts of these, because remember, we had the Civil War. That's really not a long time ago when you look at the greater picture, and the people who voted for Trump still think that the Confederates were right in those parts of the country. Right? Am I not right? Look into that. States begin to increasingly act independently. Didn't mention secede. I mentioned secede, leaving. Okay, critical infrastructure becomes unreliable. Electricity, communications, transportation, banking, and logistics. No politician understands electricity. They don't understand communications. They don't understand transportation. And some of them do. A lot of them understand banking, money. That's the whole thing about being a Yeah, I understand how money works. I understand how law works. So I'm in. Richard Nixon was a lawyer, and wasn't Obama a lawyer? So and the Clintons. So I mean, and we have to stop this. This has got to change. And Jacques Fresco even said that. I got that from him. Politicians are stupid. They don't know anything about the real world. But what's funny, I'm a diabolical. I'm a little bit of a diabolo. Here, advocate. And I can't help but think that, yeah, that's exactly how we're going to have these megalomaniac, crazy tech people becoming like the Tyrell Corporation and stuff. Like, you could see, how science fiction become fact, reality. And that's something that I don't know if you even read Philip K. Dick. You should read some science fiction. There's a lot of science fiction novels, and people just get into the whole book club and all nerdy type thing. And it's like, you're missing the fucking point. Like, I want to know why Dostoevsky wrote, like, Crime and Punishment and Idiot. And you could see, because he's really contributing to the mentality of humanity, the soul of humanity, the psyche of humanity, and we're supposed to learn something from it. It's fun to read it, and you can even get that from like Philip K. Dick. Like every book is more trippy and it's fantastic and all that. But I found out what was more interesting is the worlds that he's having these characters live out their lives, and it's always dystopic. And yeah, the government might be there, but it's like, yeah, but it's run by these tech people, these tech lord type, technocracy type things, more or less. But he didn't even focus on that. That's like the background of what his main plot is about. And I was like, I'm interested in the background. Like, wait a minute, why are all these worlds like that? And so, anyways, private companies become responsible for keeping essential systems operating. And then you have something historically unusual. Private power begins filling gaps left by public power. And that's it. So, and what's really cool is it's like, well, Musk doesn't even need an army to become extraordinarily powerful. This is the part that it wants to change. He doesn't need 100,000 soldiers marching around with Musk insignia. That's what he wants. But okay, okay, yeah, but if we have to fight an enemy, overseas, why wouldn't he just use his army? He could, like, he would. It might start out with the first androids to join the United States Army would be his Optimus robots. So that's what that would be, and it's still controlled by the government. So I wish it would kind of unpack that. I don't know if it did, but I'll just agree with it and say, yeah. Imagine instead a government is desperately dependent on. Okay, it's kind of like saying what I just got to say. Okay, satellite communications, launch capacities, AI, automatic vehicles, energy storage, technical. But I want. Okay, the last one is the most important with robotics. Because I'm really going ahead of this game, and also and droids. Um, so, and a single corporate network supplies large, uh, portions of those capacities. Okay, that company could acquire enormous bargaining power, and we're already seeing a similar version of this dependency. SpaceX just received a 1.6 billion Space Force contract. Space Force, Trump Space Force, for 18 Falcon 9 launches, while its Pentagon-related awards in 2026 have reached roughly 7 billion. The Space Force is also relying on SpaceX for satellite systems involved in communications and missile defense related capabilities. That's why the question isn't really could Elon Musk create an army? It's what happens when the government becomes dependent upon infrastructure controlled by someone who isn't the government. So, and it says here, I don't know if I'm reading all this, but it says legally Musk cannot create a U.S. Army. Yeah, legally. Again, the paper chase, the laws, the paperwork. But what happens when law becomes privatized? That's I already mentioned. It. Yeah. So and then so that's one and the same. This might be a second video I have to make on this. Okay. So, like the U.S. military is constitutionally and legally subordinate to civilian government. Constitutionally? Well, who's shitting on the Constitution, people? The Trump administration. Okay. So, a private corporation, therefore, cannot simply announce the federal government has failed, so SpaceX security forces are now the American military. Well, you know what? I disagree. I think that is going to happen sometime in the future. And it might not even be Elon Musk. It might be Elon Musk becomes like an archetype or a symbol or a type of individual. Like you have the archetype dictator. What's an archetypal dictator? Napoleon. Napoleon is a perfect one. So is Hitler. And so this guy can be an archetypal figurehead for like somebody who I'm talking about. So it doesn't even have to even be Elon Musk. It could be the Elon Musks, plural, like a Elon Musk-esque person that winds up doing what Musk was only imagining. But the latter one would have to have all the stuff in place that Elon Musk currently now possesses. So, and it says the reason why you can't do that is because that would be an enormous legal and political rupture. You're rupturing yourself already, politicians. The government is rupturing itself. You don't need Musk to do that. So the U.S. has 50 state governments, state National Guard organizations, courts, police departments. You think about the attorney generals, and like, wasn't Kamala Harris the attorney general of California? And then so she runs for president, and all these fucking red hat assholes are like, well, she's done nothing. She knows nothing. Well, it's because you don't respect the attorney general. Our own constituents don't respect the government. So the government has enemies within and enemies without. Meanwhile, everyone's beholden to Elon Musk. They all want to invest in his companies. So you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So, but then it goes, but there is a more disturbing historical possibility. You could imagine something closer to oligarchic state capture, not Musk becoming president. And you know who's mentioned the word oligarchy? You've had Chris Hedges, and Bernie Sanders is always saying oligarch, and people like that. You know, there's many others. The government increasingly needs Musk's infrastructure to function. while Musk increasingly needs government protection and contracts to maintain that infrastructure. That creates a feedback loop. So yeah, I forgot about that. The whole feedback loop thing. Got to have a feedback loop to get anything going. Okay, government weakness, greater dependence on corporations. Corporations acquire more strategic importance. Wealthy owners gain political influence. Government becomes even more dependent upon them. Private power grows relative to public power. That's a much more plausible pathway, and it doesn't require much to be malicious. That's important. The system itself can produce the concentration of power, and that's remember. I think it was Nixon, and there's a scene where he's talking. He's at the Washington Monument at night, and there's these kids, and the one of the hippie girls is like questioning what's going on with the Vietnam War and how we're involved in it, and Nixon kind of like was like saying you have to like handle the system like and you have to know how to tame it and all that. You can't just go in and say no more war in Vietnam. You have to kind of like ease. And so she was like, it sounds like you're talking about a wild animal. And I'm like, yeah, that's so cool that they put that in there. And so and I think that really happened. That conversation actually happened. So that's what the system itself is the monster, you know. And I think it was created by capitalism more than any other ideology apart from monotheism. And I think there's a connection between capitalism and monotheism. It's something I want to get into later. Or monotheism and imperialism. I'd like to get into that later. But um, Musk is unusually interesting because of SpaceX, space launch, the combination of that, SpaceX, Starlink. So you have SpaceX, space launch, Starlink, the Star Shield, communications and military networking, XAI, artificial intelligence, Tesla, vehicles, batteries, autonomy, Optimus, robotics, X, information, social communication, Neuralink, brain computer interface. Now imagine a severe institutional crisis occurring while those technologies simultaneously become more important. That's when the question of private sovereignty starts becoming intellectually serious. You could potentially have a private sector with influence over information, plus communications, plus transportation, plus energy, plus AI, plus space, plus robotics. That's an extraordinary concentration of capabilities. And I do not think Elon Musk is unaware of this. All right. And maybe the system, because of the beast, the Nixonian like beast, the thing is, the system is like that. It's sort of like let these things sprout up in this forest of our, man-made world, our milieu, and then so those things become like SpaceX and Neuralink and all that. Like it was waiting to happen, because of you know corporatized capitalism, the power grab, and science and tech always being used for military. Didn't they say that the internet was something originally from the military? So it's always like that. And so it's just sort of like what's going to happen anyways, maybe, that's an extraordinary concentration of capabilities. Okay. So let's see how close we are. Scenario, another major government shutdown. My assessment, quite possible. So this is AI's assessment. Um, Severe constitutional institutional crisis, a real risk, but difficult to predict. Federal government actually collapses and Musk or another billionaire takes government control. Very unlikely at present. Well, yes, at present. I should have asked. So what do you mean? Well, not at present, but like a few years down the line, if we continue to go where we are going, which I know I can start to that now, but I know with a 3 hour video, you know, you could do some of this yourself, you know. So I'm just kind of like showing the way. So federal government actually collapses and Musk or another billionaire takes governmental control. That's the like if I were to write a science fiction book, that's where I would probably go with this because it makes it more. I think it's more interesting for a movie script, you know. And I really think that's kind of like what will happen, but it won't look like that. It'll try to appear like it's like the public servant sector, but really it's being run and controlled by these guys all the way. Where now it's like it's still debatable. The important thing is that the distance between number one and number three isn't measured simply in years. So what is number one? Number so like uh hopefully he can remember where it is, and let's just move on, man. Okay, so okay, if courts continue functioning, elections continue functioning, Congress continues functioning, states continue functioning, the military remains under lawful civilian authority, and the government retains taxing and spending capability, then Musk cannot, of course. But if several of those institutions simultaneously cease functioning, the situation becomes much more predictable. And that's why I think your question connects to something bigger than Elon Musk, which is what I eventually that's where I wanted to go. Okay, the real historical question is what happens when democratic governments become weaker at the same time that individual billionaires become technologically stronger, because we've never had billionaires with access to this particular combination of space, infrastructure, global communications networks, AI, autonomous machines, enormous capital, and mass communications platforms. Yeah, and that's all tech and science, not just paper chase, legalities and like, this is legal tender, and your honor, no, this is like the hands-on science and the dirt of the earth, and he controls that. That's what I'm saying. That doesn't mean we're headed towards a Musk dictatorship, but it does mean that the old assumption that governments will always be vastly more powerful than individual private citizens is becoming less obviously true in certain technological domains. And exactly this is why I have gotten into this. Okay, so well, if the government keeps functioning, and that includes like voting and all that. The way I talk is funny here. It's like I sound like a stoner. Well, if you say the government keeps functioning and that includes like voting and all that, and Congress continues functioning, and elections continue and all that, but people are getting tired of the government, like they're getting tired of voting for just the Republicans and the Democrats. So I see a major crisis over the horizon, and we also have to have armies to defend ourselves from enemies, and so yeah, there seems to be something going on. I think yes, I think you're pointing to a real structural tension, but I'd separate the things you're describing rather than treating them as evidence that collapse is inevitable. But I think that it is inevitable. If we keep going down this path, this trajectory, we are going to go over the cliff, in this regard. I'm not saying that the world is going to stop, rotating, on its axis, or going around the sun. I'm just saying that we're going to fuck things up for ourselves. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so I cut through a few paragraphs because I want to be more precise in pointing out these things. So like this is where I cut down to. I went down to this question. I'm asking it. Basically, I'm going to come out and say it. I think that the elite class are not beholden to any kind of flag or any kind of nationality. Now I'm going beyond just Musk. I'm talking about the elite now, this bigger global class. And I think that there is a secret struggle between the private sector and the public sector, the public servant sector, I mean, like the governments and all that. And it's getting to be where politicians and lawyers are obsolete in comparison to people who are like computer tech, brainiac type engineers. And it's almost like they're going to be like, look, it's probably time that we put this government thing to rest and we become the government, like cut the middleman out. I think that's what is secretly happening, trying to put aside all conspiracy theories. I think, and this is what AI comes back with. I think there's ChatGPT in particular. If you want to do this, that's what I'm doing. If you want to get to similar results. So if you like, so you watch my videos now. Make sure you try to word the questions close. Like, see what I'm asking, and then ask the same questions to see what you get, and it'll take you down some interesting rabbit trails. Okay, I think there is a real phenomenon underneath what you're describing, even if I wouldn't go as far as saying there is a secret coordinated plan by engineers and billionaires to abolish government. And that's something that is like, that's food for like making some type of a movie. Of course, you got to have a plot, you have to have drama, you have to have conflict, you have to create these kinds of things for an interesting fictional story. But like the thing about fiction is it helps you think like, well, maybe this is not really happening, but let's create that scenario and have people wonder about it and get really savvy and like, hey, let's look into this. It's like, wow. Remember, anybody ever watch like Stanley Kubrick movies, like, Doctor Strangelove and all that, Doctor Strangelove, and all that? It's like there's so much. It's like when you watch a good movie or read a good book, it's like, whoa, and listen to a good record, that's kind of like where I'm coming from. Okay, the strongest version of your argument isn't really a conspiracy theory. It's a hypothesis about where power is moving. Thank you. I'm glad that I got to that point here. The shift is the shift you're describing. Historically, political power rests heavily with people who controlled land, armies, factories, money, government institutions. Now another layer has become enormously important: data, computing, AI, communication, satellites, intellectual property, technological infrastructure, and the people who control those systems aren't necessarily politicians. Yeah, a highly capable engineer or technology entrepreneur can sometimes build something that affects millions or billions of people without ever holding public office. And isn't this like unique now to us? More than ever. I mean, sure, you have like the big trains, like you have like JP Morgan and you have like the big oil tycoons and you had like, Standard Oil and all that. And the trains, how the trains were able to, transport the oil and all that. And the banks, you need the banks to facilitate all, so we already had this, but this is like even more, like a complete new layer that's dropped on us, I think. So there is a genuine change, and there's a fascinating tension here. The public sector says we have democratic legitimacy. The private technological sector can effectively respond, but we have the infrastructure that makes modern society work. Neither side completely replaces the other. Government still has things corporations don't: legitimate collective authority, taxation, courts, legislation, regulation, military forces, citizenship, constitutional authority. So the thing, let's look at authority. Who had authority before? Does King George, you know, mean anything to you? Or King Louis? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So there's that. Okay. But corporations increasingly possess things government sometimes struggles to reproduce: enormous pools of technical experience, enormous amounts of capital. Oh yeah. So like, did I read it? I read it. Like taxation, courts, legislation, regulation. These are the things and constitutional. These are the things that government has. And then it goes, but corporations increasingly possess things government sometimes struggles to reproduce: enormous pools of technical experience, enormous amounts of capital, cutting-edge computing, specialized engineering talent, rapidly deployable infrastructure, global networks, enormous quantities of data. That creates a genuine power tension between political authority and technological capability. where I would disagree with you. Do I want to read this? Let's just see where I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to tell you what it says. This is why it had like a bone to pick with me. It says that people like Zuckerberg and Bezos and Musk and Gates, Bill Gates and all that, and you have like defense contractors and all that, and Wall Street executives, they're all competing with each other. Yeah, they're competing against each other against you. They are competing against each other for what? To win something over you. Why are they competing against each other? To achieve something against you. That's about as opinionated. I mean, I'm getting really visionary here and very speculative, but as far as my opinion, that is my opinion. And I read something like Noam Chomsky about that. Like these corporations appear to be competing with each other, but really they're part of this type of arrangement where it's only to a certain degree. As long as they have us to feed on, they're not going to go after each other's throats. Literally, they're going to compete. Like what was that story? Like Mark Zuckerberg was going to wrestle Elon Musk. That would have been a great like bread and circus thing. People go to watch that. But yeah, it says they're not competing. They're competing with each other. They're not one coherent organization. Well, what are the branches of government? Don't they kind of compete with each other? They kind of like the president can veto something that's trying to be passed into a bill into law or whatever. So you always have tension. So why can't you have these corporations be the new government? You can have like the corporations are all the new government. Like Zuckerberg is in charge of one part of it, and Bezos is a part of another part, and they all kind of work together. And they meet at Davos, and they're like, yeah, this is what we have, and so we are conglomerating together. We businessmen are to block these politicians from coming in, just like we did with aristocracy and King George and these other kings and all that. We are now the government, the Constitution, the Revolutionary War and all that. So we have a new kind of revolution against these corrupt political entities and their laws, So it could. So I'm gonna ride above what the AI is telling me. It's like because I have the last say in these videos because they're my videos. And so you could vet these out yourself. So I think that no, they're not a coherent organization, but nothing actually really is. You have people within a government that are like wanting to stick it to like et tu Brute, like Brutus, like the Senate kills Julius Caesar. That's been going on forever, folks. So these people don't have to be one corporation. There are a whole bunch of separate corporations. But I think Elon Musk is kind of like, the one that's like showing how all this could be under one, head, and that's why I targeted him for this. Okay, so it doesn't agree with me. Like, okay. Engineers don't automatically want to govern. And that's true too. Like people, I just want to be a scientist and all that. And engineers, they don't want to govern. But I'm sorry, Elon Musk is not an engineer. He's a fucking businessman that has an engineer-esque type of understanding of shit. And he is a visionary. And so like I think Jeff Bezos failed physics. He couldn't do the math. I mean, he's smarter than a lot of us, but he couldn't do the math. So he got into this other thing. Becoming a businessman, and so they're not. And even Bill Gates, there's something about them, that's not just your average engineer. The engineers work for Bill Gates. The engineers work for Elon Musk. And they work for Zuckerberg. That's the difference here. I'm kind of like, straining for a gnat a little bit, but I also think that I have a point. And yeah, they don't want to, they just want to build things. But and running a country, it says, is completely different. But I don't think it's like exclusive. There's more people who are in the, like the brain sector, that actually make things that are capable of running a government then there are people in the government that can run those companies because they don't know shit about science, electronics, or physics or anything. They just know about, again, the paper chase. So that's my take. Um, but your cut out the middleman idea is worth taking seriously because there is an ideology that resembles what you're describing. It's sometimes called it's sometimes called technocracy. Thank you. I was looking for the word, and that's the word. The idea that complex societies should be governed substantially by technical experts rather than traditional political institution. And there is an even more radical version. Why should elected politicians make decisions about systems they don't understand? Thank you very much. And Jacques Fresco said that when the people who actually build those systems know how they work, that's an extremely powerful argument. But it has an equally powerful counter argument. We'll read it. Knowing how to build something doesn't mean that you know how to, that you have the authority to decide what to do with it. Yeah, that's now. But I've already questioned authority. Remember, authority. If within this picture, this scenario, what's the more fragile of the two? I think it's authority because authority eventually becomes outdated. It doesn't know how to change. Like if you get like a traffic violation, you have to go to court and you have to address the judge as your honor by the dictate of something called authority. You know, and it's like that to me is like it's kind of like that's like a throwback from like when like people were like the clergy and they were like your grace, thank you, your grace. You had to kiss his ring. That's kind of like an extension of that, right? That's just me though. I mean, I abide by the law, but I'm just saying, what I'm saying, the engineer might be able to optimize the transportation system, but who gets to decide where the roads go? Well, that's a political question. But why would a politician decide where the roads go? I mean, you ever look at our city planning? It's like it's ridiculous. You don't know how to design a city. What do you know about city planning, you politician? So no, I think it's stupid. Uh, okay, let's move on. I don't like its counter argument. I don't buy it. Okay, I'm disagreeing with the chat GP right here, right now. I could do that, you know. So the fundamental conflict isn't really politicians versus engineers. It's democratic legitimacy versus technical organized power. And we're increasingly seeing those two forms of power collide. I think that you could vote in these other people, and then that's why, and that's still a form of democracy to a certain extent. So I don't know if I'd expect this to happen. I'm just gonna ride it. But let's see where it goes. Let's see where the power collide happens between democratic legitimacy versus technical organizational power. Okay, there's also a fascinating irony in Musk's situation. If someone like Musk wants to replace government, he would actually need many of them, the things government provides. His companies needs property rights, contracts enforced by courts, intellectual property law, financial markets, infrastructure, educated workers, national security, regulatory stability, government contracts. Well, this is why I'm saying like the government has to be a referee, in all this game of life stuff of the pursuit of happiness. We have to have a referee. And so I would side with that. So anyways, so the private technological power doesn't exist independently of the state. The private sector and the public sector are deeply intertwined though. I know the Citizens United kids, look up Citizens United and see it's already happened. And it can't unravel in any kind of a peaceful, any kind of a peaceful manner. It has to be through some kind of rupturing. I think we've gone that far. If Trump never became president, and if Elon Musk never sat in the government as the chair for DOGE, I probably wouldn't be making this video. So, um, the private and the public are intertwined. So this is how it thinks and how I think differently. It says that's why I wouldn't characterize what's happening as simply the private sector is preparing to overthrow the public sector. It's not like Napoleon trying to come over and take over like France. It's like this kind of like intermingling of the two, and somehow that's going to create something like a new thing. And that's what I think is happening. So you don't have to have like this being taken over by this and you bury this. You have to have these things kind of like intermingling like that, and then you have a whole new thing, you know, like this, and then there's a church, there's a steeple, open the doors, there's all the people. Okay, that kind of thing. That's why I wouldn't care. Okay, it's a deeper phenomenon this way. Okay, technology has allowed certain private organizations to accumulate capabilities that once existed almost exclusively inside governments, and that creates a new political problem. I think it creates a whole new political, and I said like you have the two, they come together, and then they create a whole new third thing. That's what I'm depicting. And so it says, and that creates a new political problem that our existing democratic institutions weren't necessarily designed for. That's the part of your argument I think deserves very serious attention. And then I go, yeah, I would agree that the elites are not unified, but imagine like a Game of Thrones type of scenario where you have a bunch of aristocratic like families or kings, and they somehow they're competing with each other, but at the same time, I think, and they're doing it now. They function in a way where it appears like they're competing, but in reality, they're also sort of the like working with each other. And so I still think that the obstacle that they face is usually a government and a government one, because like with DOGE, Elon Musk goes in there and then he deregulates. He creates DOGE and deregulates, and then he comes out much more, rich, like a trillionaire. And so I think all this is somehow connected, and it benefits the other people, the other rich people, like billionaires. And I think that somehow, yeah, in a scenario where there was nothing but them alone, then like in Game of Thrones, they would go fighting each other. But right now, there's still enough to go around. Like there's enough of us to chew on. Uh, but right now, there's still enough to go around to where they could use each other to help them deal with a common enemy, which is like government, supervision or intervention. So this is okay. So this is like we're at 147, and I'm just going to keep going. You know why? Because this is what's interesting. It it was kind of like reneging, which is really interesting, and you'll see this in like as I read, about Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire. It kind of like goes in there, and we'll see how I get out of it. Using the sleeping fox. Okay, yes, I think your Game of Thrones analogy becomes more stronger if we translate it from secret conspiracy into a theory of elite coordination and common interests. You don't need the billionaire to sit in a room and agree on a master plan. They can compete fiercely with one another while simultaneously benefiting from the same changes in the political and economic system. Think of it as a coalition of competitors. Musk doesn't have to cooperate personally with Bezos, Zuckerberg, or other billionaires. They can compete over markets, technology, government contracts, advertising, talent, investment, political influence, while nevertheless having overlapping interests, concentrating things such as, I wonder if I read that right. So they could compete. They're competing for that list of things that I threw out at you, But then, while nevertheless having overlapping interests concerning things such as lower taxes on capital, fewer regulations, weaker labor constraints, less antitrust enforcement, privatization. They all want that, right? Favorable government contracts, protection of intellectual property, reduced government intervention in their industries. That's not necessarily a conspiracy. It's what economists would generally call aligned interest or collective action dynamics. And it also talks about like coordinate openly through lobbying organizations and trade associations and political donations and stuff like that. So this is where I just want to kind of get into this, but then I want to get out of it because I didn't want this to be a part of the main uh, argument. So it goes. The basic sequence you're pointing out is real. Musk becomes enormously influential in government. DOGE targets government spending and regulation. Musk companies and other wealthy businesses operate in the resulting environment. Musk's personal wealth rises dramatically. And that's true. That's what happened, right? But we should be careful about saying DOGE made Musk a trillionaire. Why? If DOGE never existed, Musk would probably eventually become a trillionaire, maybe, possibly, probably would, but it's a hypothetical, and we don't want hypotheticals in the court of law. Do not bring any hypotheticals here. Okay, and I think that's what I think, But anyways, that's what it's saying. It's like it's harder to establish that. And we already been through that. And if you go back and watch that video, it's 2 hours long. You'll see how it still connects one with the other. And ChatGPT kind of went along with it. It just I wasn't trying to force my word onto it, but you have to know how to ask these questions, and you have to like rattle with the ChatGPT a little bit, and then eventually, So there was a time I remember, like when I first found out that Nixon compromised the Vietnam talks and he postponed the peace talks and extended the Vietnam War to like 1975 from 68 to 75. The very first time I asked like an AI that I don't know which one, Open AI or something like that. There's no evidence of that. And then later on, after like 5 years or 4 years, 5 years, I think it was 5 years ago. And now you look at it, it's like, oh, guess what? No, there was. He totally did it. You can just look it up. Did Nixon sabotage peace talks from 68 to 75? Yes, it's absolutely true. That's what I'm saying. And the reason why is because I think some historians were teaching at these schools, and you could watch their YouTube video channel, and it wound up all these people are watching, and so that affects. It's like, yeah, actually, that's college level history, and that's actually true. You don't learn that in high school level history. So, anyways, um, so his wealth is overwhelmingly tied to the valuations of existing companies, and particularly Tesla. And those valuations can move enormously for reasons unrelated to Doge. That is what it's saying. But that's not what took place after Doge. This guy, he got big, man. And it's because, and we already looked at, if you watch the other video, how all these different agencies that he cut in half, they were all riding his ass and pretty much all of his companies. So I'm mixing some opinion with fact. And so, but it's still worth watching that video. And I still think that it's true. But it goes, the stronger argument is about potential conflicts of interest and structural incentives. If an extremely wealthy businessman gains substantial influence over the government agencies that regulate industries in which he has enormous financial interest, then reducing regulation can potentially benefit his own economic position as well as other wealthy business owners. That's a legitimate thing to look at. And then it goes, and your Game of Thrones analogy captures something important. Imagine five powerful families. They hate each other. They compete constantly. But there's a king collecting enormous taxes and imposing rules on all five. The families might say, I hate House Stark. I hate House Lannister. I hate House Targaryen. But when the king proposes another tax on all of them, suddenly, well, perhaps we can agree on something. That's essentially how interest group politics can work. They don't need to form a permanent alliance. They only need to recognize there are certain things that threaten all of our interests, and government regulation can sometimes be one of those things. And here's an important twist. But there is an important twist. The government isn't necessarily the enemy of the billionaire class. Well, not now. I mean, go back to like RFK. I'm sorry, um, man. Go back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. Okay, you had like John Keynes economics that at that time challenged the classical sense of economics, if that's what you would call it, where the free market will heal itself or manage itself. So when the Great Depression happened and all this guy from Britain, this British guy, his economics was like, well, no, we have to have the government act like a referee to keep the private sector, the big corporations or the businesses, from collapsing itself or collapsing the economy. And that was replaced by the Milton Friedman economics. So we went backwards when it comes to like, you know, the economical science of how to run businesses and things. And so money is always tied in with the politics, right? So that's the thing. So like, and I think I mentioned this before, this dog, I might as well chase this dog while it's passing by. And so it's like, how people like if you're a Trump supporter, do you think money should be in politics? Yes or no? If no, if you're a capitalist, let's say you're a venture capitalist, at least you think you are. Should money be in politics? Now you're gonna probably be like, well, it depends. If it suits my interest, you probably say yeah, because you want to protect the Citizens United, which is bullshit. Money should never be in politics, right? That's the ultimate answer that you should try to come up with. Well, if money is a problem in politics, what if money was like the problem in a lot of things in life? And so that's why the government isn't necessarily the enemy of the billionaire class. Well, duh. And even when John Keynes was alive, it's not like he was an enemy of all that, but he was saying that you have to somehow, figure this out. And so the government had to come in and say, look, we're going to tell you can't do that. We're gonna lower the ceiling or put a ceiling where you can't go above that. The private and public, banking and the Bank Act of 33, all that stuff was there. And then all that's gone, removed by Democrats and Republicans. And so this Milton Friedman kind of a thing ever since Reagan, and they still follow the Milton Friedman type of economic model, I think. So the government is the source of its power, and that's because of the authority. You know, respect my authority. But what I'm saying is when that's like, anyways, what I already said. So that's what it's saying. So counter arguments. Let's move on. So let's see. I can't help it. I decided to throw this in here. I said, hey, wait a minute, hold on. The thing about Elon Musk before and then after Doge is sort of like just follow what's happened and not like the intention behind it. So Elon Musk before Doge was like, how rich was he? He was like 300 or 400 billion, and then after Doge, interestingly enough, he winds up close to a trillion, like 8 billion. So I think that you need to dig a little deeper instead of like these surface type stories that you're getting to from the internet and really, really try to think, although you can't because you're just AI and you'll come to understand what I'm talking about. Yes, and I think your concern is fair. if we're trying to understand what happened, we shouldn't start by assuming either Musk's intentions or the official explanation. We should start with the sequence of events, which I like. That's what follow the money is, folks. That's what that really means, and that's been around for decades. Follow the money. The money, the institutional changes, and who benefits. So who cares about what people say they think? Look at what's happening. And when you do that, there really is something worth investigating. First, one correction. So my numbers, okay, I'll just read. Okay, I made some mistakes in the previous question, but let's just run with it. The correction of numbers must enter 2025 extremely wealthy. Yeah, I know, about 421 billion at the end of 2024. So I said like I said 3 to 400 billion, and this is saying 421 billion. Okay, I was kind of right. Um, so he's saying that it didn't go like you said, but this is what had happened. The trajectory you're pointing to is real. End of 2024, he was 421 billion. December 2025, 754 billion. February 2026, 852 billion. He subsequently crossed a trillion after SpaceX went public in 2026, according to okay. His wealth has since fallen substantially because of SpaceX stocks decline. I didn't know that. Okay, so I'm learning in real time. I didn't know that. Forbes put him around 696 billion. Okay, he's still a trillionaire. Okay. So you're absolutely right about the scale of the transformation. I think that his transformation wouldn't have been so like abrupt or whatever. I still think it was there if he had nothing to do with Trump. And that's it. If he had nothing to do with Trump, nothing to do with DOGE, or nothing about any of that, he'd just be like, Zuckerberg, or better yet, Amazon. I think Amazon's bigger than Meta. And he wouldn't be like the spotlight thing. You got to remember the reason why I'm after this guy is the whole chainsaw thing, and he's going to reduce the government spending. And then like Reagan said that too, the government is the problem. Yeah, get rid of the referee, and because they want to privatize everything. And he's definitely going to make bank. So, but even if this is kind of like, throwing a wrench here or there, really stick to your guns here, man. I'm sorry. That's about as opinionated as I would get. I'm very opinionated, but I try to rest it on a foundation of, looking at it and vetting it out and all that. But I am left, but like, okay, anyways, you see the logic of my points here, right? And so, and it goes, so the transformation is real. It does say that, okay? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of additional paper wealth in roughly a year and a half. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Thank you very much. And it goes, so it's kind of like, but what you're saying here is even more interesting. Instead of, okay, so I'd ask a series of harder questions. What did DOGE actually change? Not just its claimed savings, which agencies were weakened, which regulations disappeared, which programs lost personnel, which enforcement capacities were reduced. Two, which industries benefited from those changes. So it was not just Musk. It was I think it was competitors, like it says, look at energy, finance, technology, defense, transportation, pharmaceuticals, mining, and telecommunications. Did the beneficiaries include Musk companies? Absolutely worth examining. Yes. So let's want to get beyond just defending my argument against Musk here. I want to go to what originally we were talking about. So give me a second. Let's say something like There's another place that strengthens your observation. Musk's wealth increases wasn't simply because Tesla went up. A huge part of the explosion came from SpaceX valuation. And it goes into that. Yeah. So let's hold on here. All right, I'll just read this. All right, I'll just read this one part. It says in December 2025, SpaceX was valued around 8 billion, double its roughly 4 billion valuation from August. Forbes estimated that Musk's approximately 42% stake added about 168 billion to his personal fortune. Then in February 2026, SpaceX acquired XAI in a transaction valuing the combined company at 1.25 trillion, which Forbes estimated increased Musk's fortune by another, 84 billion. That brought him to the 852 billion. And then came SpaceX IPO, which pushed the company above 2 trillion valuation, and that's why so the chain of events is DOGE government influence, Musk political power increases, Musk companies remain deeply connected to government contracts and national security infrastructure, which should never happen. SpaceX's valuation explodes. Musk's ownership stake becomes worth hundreds of billions more. Musk becomes vastly more powerful economically, and so on and so on. It still doesn't want to say that that's the that still can't back your conclusion up 100%. But I'm a little bit, I kind of disagree with that. But you can kind of see the chain of events that even ChatGPT is saying. But it says, there was a feedback relation between political power and private wealth. The whole feedback loop thing, and that's probably what I should originally said in my first video. And the title is something about a feedback loop between Doge and private wealth and all that. But let it stand on its own, and you decide. I still think that it's like it is what it is. Okay, this. I hope you forgive me because I forgot this question. I said, all right, so what if what if he wasn't a part of Doge at all? And so those regulation agencies were still there that had conflict with his companies. And so how much do you think he would have made when he would make SpaceX public if there was no Doge in comparison to he makes it public after Doge, right? And I think that's what I'm driving at. And I know there would be a difference. Yes, there would have been a difference. And it says, I understand now what you're thinking. So it says, you're asking if Musk had not entered government through Doge and the regulatory environment affecting SpaceX and that had remained substantially more restrictive, would SpaceX have reached the same valuation when it was public, and therefore would Musk have become as wealthy? That is a much better question. And yes, there is certainly a difference. And so I don't know if I should keep going on. So obviously there is, and so it says that there would be a difference, and it would have rendered him less of a trillionaire. Okay, and so trust me on that. That's what it's saying here. And it gets into a lot of numbers and figures again, and it's like, yeah, blah blah blah. Okay, and then it goes, and here's where your hypothesis becomes testable. We can ask what happened to SpaceX regulatory environment. There were some striking developments during the Doge period. For example, the Trump administration's federal workforce cut hit NOAA, Office of Space Commerce, which is involved in space traffic coordination and commercial satellite licensing. Reuters reported that roughly a third of that small office was dismissed, leaving major licensing functions disrupted. And SpaceX had already been fighting regulators. That's why Joker's coming out. That's why I say what I said originally, and I still believe it. So the FAA had proposed a $333,000 fine against SpaceX for license violations, and Musk had called for the resignation of the FAA administrator. So it's like they're all in his ass. So it's like, and then you see him with the chainsaw. Doesn't it make sense? He's interested in himself, people. He doesn't care about you. These people don't care about you. And that's why I say, and that's why I'm looking into this. And ultimately, this is about the whole, like God-like posturing, and like he thinks he's a god or whatever. That's what they want to. That's why I have to get through this. I don't want to deal with this rigmarole about, did he become more rich because of Doge? And I think we've established that. So I'm kind of getting tired of this. I should probably just forget this part of it and move on. So, like, Doge was aggressively reducing the federal workforce and dismantling or weakening agencies, including the CFPB, while Musk's companies had significant government relationships. Reuters specifically identified potential conflicts of interest surrounding Musk companies and Doge activities. We already know this, all right? So let's just move on. So I cut through a lot of the chase, and so now the conversation went to where you have like governments being replaced by someone like Elon Musk or some other big tech corporation, and it says like well that could happen on its own without a mastermind orchestrating it, and that's something that's worth noting. It says like each sector pursues their own interest. Okay, and then it goes, the aggregate result can be a transfer of power from public institutions towards private institutions without anyone having designed the entire system. And that's what's interesting. So that's not where we are at. So we're done trying to, you know, defend my argument that, Elon Musk became a trillionaire, when he got into Doge and all that. And then he got out, and then mysteriously, and we saw how, SpaceX went public and all that. But it still stands the reason that's why he became one faster than what he probably would have if he didn't. And ChatGPT agreed with that. So that's how we made a truce. And so I still stand like, I'm I corrected it. So I really think that I was right, you know. Um, and yeah, Elon Musk doesn't care about you. He only cares about you in so much that it's convenient for him, and that's how all these people operate, including your politicians. The aggregate result can be a transfer of power from public to private without it being designed by an individual. Okay, and historically, that can be more dangerous than a conspiracy because there isn't necessarily anybody in charge who can simply call it off. Call it off. You know what? It could be AI. AI could be the new, overseer of all this. Managing things. And that's something that's been in science fiction, and that's it's not like I came up with that just now. It's obvious, that could be the case in a fictional scenario. Um, so it says, let's look at that. And so I go, yes, I originally thought about this because for human history, we never had extra governmental, or rather an entity outside of any king or religion or government that can potentially outmatch said entities because they have science and tech on their side. Originally, we had who has the more powerful God, which was determined by manpower. Exactly. That is a historical discontinuity you're identifying. For most of human history, political power and technological power were essentially fused inside of the same institutions. A king controlled the army, land, taxation, and administration. A church controlled religious legitimacy and often enormous property and social organization, which it still does. Catholic Church owns I don't know how many, hectares of land. Uh, the empire controls the roads, communications, bureaucracy, and military. Even when a merchant class became powerful, it generally remained subordinate to the sovereign, which is true, right? But the merchant class, then you get capitalism and all that. The money became the new god. If it was always a god, okay, but money became the new god. Okay, and I think the new god from money will be like information and the power, the techno, lords. I think that's the third new god, And then they see themselves as gods, That's what I'm going with. Okay. The important thing today is that technological capacity can exist outside of the sovereign. A company can potentially possess global communications infrastructure, satellites, enormous computing capacity, AI, autonomous machines, again, enormous financial resources, proprietary scientific knowledge. And that one, scientific knowledge is the key behind all of this. So it's the science. Without the science, you still have a bunch of, godlike kings, and a bunch of idiocracy kind of thing going on, idiot things going on. Science is what brought us into this whole dilemma. And I'm not against science, okay? I'm just saying that is where the power is. That's where the power lies in terms of what you see with like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Amazon. At least technologically, the science and technology married together. That's what that is. Okay, science knowledge, sophisticated manufacturing, access to millions of people through information platforms. That is historically unusual. Your who has the more powerful god analogy is actually pretty good. So I impressed this thing. In ancient societies, legitimacy and power were intertwined with supernatural authority. Our god is stronger. But ultimately, somebody had to be able to mobilize human beings, armies, workers, taxpayers, priests, and administrators. How can you have a bunch of converts if there's no freaking army? How can the Muslims spread out into India and all that? How could, the Christianity have spread out into the Americas and keep that thing to stick, without any kind of military force? Wouldn't have happened. So the technology progressively changed the equation. Gods to kings to states, to industrial states to technological organizations. I would like to put somewhere in the middle there the merchant class and money. And that is between gods and kings and technological organizations, because you needed that money, that capital, to really fuel the engine to create those technological, wonders, right? So the modern state became extraordinarily powerful because it could combine science plus bureaucracy plus industrial production plus taxation plus mass machines. But now we're seeing something strange. Some private organizations possess technological capabilities approaching the complexity of state capabilities without themselves being states. That's the historical novelty you're reacting to. And I think there's an even deeper point. The ultimate power isn't necessarily owning an army, it's owning the systems that an army and everyone else depends on. If an organization controls communication, satellites, AI, logistics, and all this other technical stuff, it may have enormous structural power even without formally possessing sovereignty. Okay. So like that's why this is very interesting to the Chat GPT. It's saying like Elon Musk isn't a sovereign state or or a government. Yet collectively, companies like these can develop capabilities that historically would have been found primarily inside governments, and that's exactly what I was driving at. And that's what I've been circling around. Are billionaires secretly trying to take over? I think yes, they are. But it's going to be like very, like, you have to be more nuanced than that. And uh, it's going to say, don't ask that. It's more like, can technological power eventually become significantly independent of political sovereignty that private organizations became capable of competing with, capturing, or effectively substituting for parts of the state? I think the answer is potentially yes. And that's what I said earlier, right? So whether it happens is, that's an underlying technical. It says, but whether that happens and whether it produces a kind of neo-feudal system you're imagining is a completely separate question. But the underlying technological condition is generally new in human history. Can we imagine a scenario where Elon Musk goes megalomaniac Yes, we can imagine. This is the last part of this whole thing. Yes, we can. Yes, we can imagine that scenario, and given the framework we've been developing, it actually makes sense as a thought experiment, which is what I wanted this segment to be. Um, but I distinguish Musk becomes megalomaniac from Musk successfully becomes a dictator. The first is psychologically imaginable. The second requires a whole series of institutional failures. A plausible fictional scenario would look something like this: one, Musk becomes confined. Must one Musk becomes convinced that traditional government is fundamentally incompetent. He starts believing that engineers and technologists, not politicians, are the people capable of solving civilization's problems. Two, his companies become increasingly indispensable. SpaceX, Starlink provides communications and space infrastructure. AI provides decision support. Tesla robotics provide autonomous machines and energy systems. Three, a severe national crisis occurs. Economic collapse, war, political paralysis, infrastructure failures, and some combination. Four, government begins outsourcing emergency functions, not because anyone formally abolishes democracy, but because we need somebody who can actually make this work. Five, Musk's organizations become quasi-governmental. They provide communications, logistics, infrastructure, AI systems, perhaps emergency services. Government remains legally in charge, but increasingly depends on Musk's technological apparatus. And remember, you can replace Musk with somebody that's Musk-like. Like he let him be the archetype. Like say, George Washington is an archetype of a good, politician president, or Lincoln is an archetype of a good guy, politician president. Where Hitler is the archetype of a bad guy, politician, ruler, or dictator. And so Elon Musk is like his own kind of a archetype of sorts. So it doesn't you can replace Elon Musk with somebody else, like a potential Bezos, or somebody like that. But Musk is unique among all of these, and we've already looked at why, right? So that's why we're sticking with Musk right now for this example. Musk begins demanding political authority proportional to his technological responsibility. And that's it right there. I never thought about wording it that way. Look, my responsibility is like weighing all this stuff on my shoulder. So I'm going to demand the authority that you clowns got. Give that to me. Because all this is mine anyways. Well, that's what ultra capitalists say. Well, that's his. He can do what he wants with that money. It's his. I'm like, no, it's not. I think Obama said that. No, it's not. You didn't do that to yourself. And they got all mad, and they vote this turkey bird president in now. So this guy president now. Anyways, but like that's the thing, it's like he says it's mine, so I can, I should get the authority. Anyway, the argument becomes, if I'm responsible for keeping the system functioning, I need the authority to make the decisions necessary to keep it functioning. That's the dangerous transition. The public is offered stability in exchange for diminished democratic control. And you know what? That's exactly where we're going to go. That's why I want to make this video. It doesn't have to even, so now it's a bigger thing than just Musk. It's the way how the beast that Nixon it couldn't tame, how it has metastasized into this, right? And even he would not have predicted this, uh, anyways. And Henry Kissinger, and maybe he might have thought about it in his nightmares, but that's about it. Okay, the public is offered stability in exchange for diminished democratic control. And this connects directly to your earlier point. You wouldn't necessarily get a guy standing up saying, I am your new king. You might get democracy remains, elections remain, the Constitution remains, but extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary administrative authority. That's much more believable as a dystopian scenario. And the really frightening part is that Musk wouldn't necessarily need a private army initially. He could have something more powerful, dependency. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, that's what that is. if millions of people depend upon your communications network, businesses depend upon your infrastructure, the military depends upon your satellites, and government depends upon your AI and technical personnel, then your bargaining position can become enormous. A private security force could come later in the hypothetical, but the ability to make yourself indispensable is arguably more important than having soldiers. And I think that's what it's all about. The soldiers, I was thinking you would have soldiers against, enemies abroad. And it's like, well, the government can't make, we got to put our optimist line in there. First, it's like sublet by the government. Like, you have like Lockheed Martin, hiring private manufacturers to make its airplane parts. But let's say the government's like, we have to hire blah, blah, blah to use Elon Musk's soldiers, his robots. And that's how it would transpire. And so, okay, and there is a historical analogy here. Feudal power wasn't simply about castles and knights. It was about dependency relationships. People depended upon lords for land, protection, employment, and access to resources. The technological version could be people, platforms, infrastructure, corporations, billionaire owners. That's why I think your original intuition is worth exploring as a science fiction political thought experiment, while keeping a firm distinction between that scenario and evidence for what's really happening or what Musk's plan is. Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, so you have like the ego, the id, and the super ego. With people like Musk, the super ego is kind of like catatonic, or it's kind of like sometimes it's not as rigid or not as as strong as it should be. So basically, the super ego is like a police officer that tells the child, like, instinctual animal of the id, don't touch there, don't you no, get your hands off, that's not yours. And you have those little stupid little AI memes of the baby crying. It's like Trump, and he wants to get his hands on Greenland, and then he starts crying because he can't get it. That's the id, all right. And the thing that's stopping it from taking Greenland is the super ego. And so what I'm trying to say here is, inside the mechanizations of his psychology, he has a stronger id than a super ego, and that stronger id is like saying that he would be like, he does have a plan like that. Because all these different companies are so strategically mapped out. It's brilliant. If anything, it gives them control. And that's something that's apparent already. So it's something to do with his id, man. It's his id. Okay. And that's controlling his ego. Okay. All right. Okay. I know it's kind of funny. Right? Okay. And there's one especially interesting question we could take this into. What would the stages look like between today's Musk and a hypothetical technological sovereign? What institutional safeguards would have to fall at each stage? That would that would be interesting. And I said, okay, do it. So it goes, okay, then let's map it out. The interesting thing is that Musk wouldn't have to consciously plan the entire process for it to happen. The transition could emerge through crises and dependency. Exactly. That's the perfect scenario for this. A hypothetical path from billionaire technological sovereign, which is exceptional private power. Musk already represents that, and so on. Plus his money, plus his companies, and all that. It's so the important ingredient isn't his wealth; it's his capability. And so, two, government becomes dependent on private technology. Government increasingly relies on private companies for all of these things that he makes. All right, let's just stick to that. At this point, government still has legal authority, but we talked about the frailty of authority. The frailty of authority. That's kind of an interesting title for something. It takes like 100 or so years, but authority changes and it gives up you know passes its mantle to somebody else. You know, and so that's the thing about the frailty of authority. And so it says here, at this point, government still has legal authority. We already get that. Okay, stage 3, political crisis. Imagine prolonged dysfunction. If your God doesn't answer your prayers, what's good? What good is that God? It's kind of like, okay, Congress can't agree, budgets fall, agencies lose capacity, public confidence collapses. People begin saying government can't do anything anymore. Now, who said that? Who said that? It was a Republican. Somebody wants to privatize everything. Government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. And that's why the people like Trump is in the White House, because he's the one who said he was going to drain the swamp. And then he gets corporations inside in the form of Elon Musk siding with him because like he's gonna do tax cuts for these rich people. That's freaking obvious. The other reason why Musk is like where he's at. I mean, come on, people. This is so freaking obvious. So government can't do anything anymore. Well, okay. Meanwhile, the private technological organizations continue functioning. Yeah, let's privatize everything. That's what this whole thing is. The public will become privatized. That's all this is basically saying. But then on top of that, the added caveat is this godlike posturing, that doesn't seem to go away. That's an important psychological transition. The government starts looking incompetent while the corporation looks competent. Stage 4, emergency privatization. Government begins saying, we need the private sector to keep essential systems operating. Contracts expand, functions get outsourced, public employees are replaced by contractors and automated systems. Automated systems, huge. The justification is initially perfectly reasonable. We have an emergency. We need whoever can actually get the job done. And isn't that the whole thing about the business, like trying to treat government like it's a business? Well, okay, let's really cut to the chase. Let's get the freaking job done, right? It's falling into that pocket. So dependency becomes permanent. The emergency ends, or partially ends, but nobody reverses the arrangements. And that's nothing. That's not a new phenomena. Okay. Now government discovers we can't easily take this back. We no longer have the personnel, infrastructure, or expertise. This is the crucial point. Thank you. Privatization becomes irreversible because the state has lost capacity. Thank you. Stage 6. Private authority begins becoming political authority. Now the billionaire can say, you can't regulate us like an ordinary company. We're providing essential national infrastructure. And there's truth to that argument. The government has become dependent upon them. So the relationship changes from government corporations to government corporation. So you have like these little arrows, the government to the corporation, right? The government, injects the corporation to the government and corporation. They are eventually potentially the government. Wait a minute. It says government corporation to government interact exchanging with corporation, and eventually potentially government to corporation for certain functions. They becoming that, I think. Okay, the billionaire becomes a political institution. I think it's supposed to be like government, corporation, government, and then it goes corporation, government. Stage 7, the billionaire becomes a political institution. At this point, Musk wouldn't merely be a businessman. He would become something historically stranger. A private individual whose organizations perform functions that are normally associated with the state. He might still technically be subordinate to government, but practically government and cannot operate normally without him. That's where your idea of a shell government becomes relevant. Yeah, it's a shell government. And so, yeah, because people will like that. People would like the idea that, yeah, there's like a government, but really it's just a shell at this point. Stage 8, the legitimacy bargain. This is the part you were getting at earlier. The system doesn't necessarily eliminate elections. Instead, it says You still have elections, you still have courts, you still have social programs, you still have a president, but increasingly important decisions are being made by technical systems and private organizations that voters have very little ability to control. The public receives stability and services, the technological elite receive power and autonomy. That's the bargain. Stage 9, the point of no return. Eventually, someone says, why are we maintaining this cumbersome government bureaucracy at all? And then the answer comes because it gives the system legitimacy. That's the shell you're describing. Government becomes less of the machinery of power and more the legitimizing institution of the machinery of power. This is an extreme scenario, obviously not a prediction. Isn't that something that's going on like with England in that you have like the Queen and then you have the Parliament and the President or Prime Minister? Isn't that kind of like, you know what I mean? They wouldn't just like, oh, we don't want just a Queen. You got to have the Parliament and you got to have the Prime Minister and all that. And so it's like one sort of like came in and took over the other, but the other one's still there. And it's kind of like, so like with here, it's like you have our government, but then like the new dimension of this is coming in, the new layer is coming in, and they're the ones that are saying that we're going to actually do all the work here, and you're just there for posturing, for like the stability or whatever. Okay, so anyways, that is an extreme scenario, obviously not a prediction, but there's a fascinating historical principle underneath your thought experiment. When the institution that possesses legitimate authority loses the capacity to actually perform essential functions, the institution that possesses the necessary capabilities can acquire power without formally acquiring sovereignty. And that is why the combination of AI, robotics, satellites, private capital, and weakened governmental institutions is worth watching. The future danger might not be the billionaire becomes king, it might be much stronger. The billionaire never becomes king because the distinction between billionaire and government gradually stops meaning very much. Exactly. I mean, this is how I want to end it. He becomes God. Let's see where this takes us. Yes, if we push your thought experiment to its extreme, he becomes God, is actually a useful metaphor, not literally supernatural, but something closer to functional godhood. One private individual possessing enough technological, economic, informational, and political power that ordinary people experience. His decisions are as almost beyond their control. The progression would be wealth to technology to infrastructure to dependency to political influence to sovereignty to perceived omnipotence. Perceived is a big word. It's all in your mind, right? Remember, the only thing that's free is between your ears. They control that. Now you're kneeling to another god. Let's proceed. And technology could make the metaphor much stronger than anything available to an ancient king. An ancient king could say, I command the army. A hypothetical technological sovereign could potentially control or influence communication, information, AI, transportation, energy, satellites, robotics, financial systems, access to essential services. He wouldn't literally be omnipotent. He'd still depend on thousands of millions of people, competing institutions, other corporations, and physical resources. Well, all I have to say is how powerful is any god if there's no one worshiping it and obeying its commands? So that's what I got to say about that. Okay, well, to an ordinary person, the difference between the government controls my life and a technological organization controls my life could become surprisingly small. And there is an even deeper historical irony in your original observation. For ancient people, God, king, state was a hierarchy of authority. Your hypothetical future reverses a part of that. The human corporation, okay, so it's human, corporation, technological sovereign, something approaching godlike power. That's essentially the terminology, the territory of science fiction and political philosophy, which is what I want to get into for this today. The question of what happens when technological capability becomes so concentrated that the person controlling it acquires power resembling an old concept of divine authority. The safeguard is also the obvious one. No individual should possess enough control over the underlying technological infrastructure that society cannot meaningfully say no to them. Because once society loses the ability to say no, you've crossed the line from wealthy entrepreneur into something much closer to a sovereign power. And then I go, this is what I said. Well, I went there because believing in this fuel of gods. Okay, well, let me rephrase that. I was saying that belief is the fuel of gods. So I went there because believing is the fuel of the gods. Faith is the fuel of God. And how do you achieve this? Control the narrative via technology. He can do just that. Virtually speaking, for example. Yes, now I see the philosophical move you're making. You're not really claiming Musk could acquire supernatural powers. You're redefining godhood in terms of social reality. A god, Neuralink and the internet. You can create like now you're like in some kind of like virtual reality. Like the Matrix. I'm surprised it didn't mention Matrix, but that's kind of like where I was going without even, yeah. Okay, a God in human society has power partially because people believe in the God. So your equation is something like belief, legitimacy, obedience, power. And in the technological age, control of information can influence belief. That makes your hypothetical much more interesting. For example, imagine a future in which a technological sovereign has extraordinary influence over an integrated information environment. Well, there it is. And you've seen you already seen that in movies and stuff. I already mentioned Matrix. Okay, AI systems determines what information people encounter. Social platforms determine what narratives spread. Algorithms determines what receives attention. Virtual augmented reality determines what people experience. Personalized AI assistants become the primary source through which individuals learn about the world. Now imagine that the same corporate ecosystem controls significant portions of those systems. It wouldn't have to say, believe in me. It could theoretically create an environment in which the person's perception of reality is increasingly mediated by systems controlled by that organization. That's a very different kind of power than traditional propaganda. The ancient king controls the messenger. The technological sovereign potentially controls the entire information environment through which the population understands reality. And that's where your God metaphor becomes powerful. A traditional deity possesses omniscience, omnipresence, authority, control over the narrative of existence. A sufficiently enhanced I'm sorry, let me go back. A sufficiently advanced technological system could simulate some of those properties. Omniscience, enormous quantities of data about individuals. Omnipresence, AI assistants, phones, satellites, cameras, platforms. Authority, governments and institutions relying on the technology, native control, recommendation algorithms, AI generated information, virtual environments. Obviously, that isn't actual divine power, but socially perceived omniscience and omnipresence can produce a very real authority. And there's an especially profound twist. The God wouldn't necessarily have to control what people believe, it can control what people are able to encounter. That's arguably more powerful. If you control the information environment, you don't necessarily need to tell everyone X is true. You can simply make X overwhelmingly visible while alternative interpretations become difficult to find. The algorithms, man. That's why I don't get a lot of followers. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, that is why information pluralism matters so much in democracy. It's like a free press. And this is also why I would broaden your thought experiment beyond Musk, which is what. Remember, he's an type of somebody like ultimately he's like what Emperor Palpatine. It's kind of like that. I don't know where the supernatural part comes, the thoughts. But it doesn't have to stop with Musk. And I already had mentioned that like 3 times. Okay,
The future technological God might not be a single person at all. This is good. It could be an interlocking ecosystem of AI companies, platforms, governments, financial institutions, telecommunication networks, and data infrastructures. Musk is interesting because his companies span several of these domains, but the underlying phenomena is much larger. And I'm glad that I did this because it's putting things to light. Okay, and that brings us to perhaps the most frightening version of your idea. What happens when people stop asking a government, a church, or even another human being what is true and start asking an AI? Because then whoever controls the systems that mediate those answers is merely controlling information. They're participating in the construction of people's reality. That's much closer to the technological God you're describing. And thank you. That's exactly where this needed to go for the conclusion of this video.